there have been times in certain meetings where Department of Energy representatives will state that the information on Hanford, or on Oak Ridge for that matter, any of the Department of Energy facilities, was not released to the public because, for national security reasons. Now, at first glance, that sounds like it might be legitimate, but when you think about it, there really wasn't any national security interest served after the bombs were dropped, because after 1945, it was clear what the mission of Hanford was. And there wasn't any reason to keep back this information from people. My feeling, the most logical explanation I've heard over the years for why this information on Hanford's radioiodine and the Nevada test site radioiodine and the other radionuclides wasn't shared with the public is merely liability, that the government doesn't want to deal with people's health problems that were caused by these involuntary exposures. It's highly unfair because when you think about it, people who enlist voluntarily in the military, knowing that they are at certain risk, these are adults who voluntarily sign up for the military service, are exposed to something, then are offered health care. Let's take Agent Orange, let's take the work that's being done now on the Gulf War syndrome. Folks who voluntarily enlisted are given better care than people like myself who were involuntarily exposed as children. There's something wrong with this picture. We're not asking for every single person who is exposed to the radionuclides from the Nevada test site or Hanford or Oak Ridge or Savannah River, for that matter, to be taken care of. We are looking at the highest risk folks. There are individual risk factors which come into play that'll help to determine which people are at highest risk for developing some of the health outcomes from the radionuclides. Such as with radioiodine, the milk pathway is very important. Children who had goat's milk had even higher doses of radioiodine than children who had cow's milk. Children who drank cow's milk from backyard cows or neighbors' cows were at higher risk than kids who got milk from the dairy, because the dairy milk sits longer and therefore you get less potency in the radioiodine with the passage of time. Fresh milk from backyard cows that people drink right away still has the very high radioiodine content. Goats, for some reason, concentrate the radioiodine higher than cows. So if you look at all the factors, including the age at time of exposure, what type of milk, if any, the child drank, gender plays a role in this. Girls and women are more susceptible to thyroid disease than males. You can figure out which parts of the population, which folks in the U.S. are at higher risk due to the Nevada test site exposures or Hanford exposures. And then you can tell them they were exposed to start with so they can seek appropriate health care. And then you can offer them appropriate care for diseases that are logically or plausibly related to the exposures. We're not asking for health care for an ingrown toenail or a broken leg. We're saying, with regard to the Hanford exposures or Nevada test site exposures, give the people at highest risk care for thyroid disease. Make sure that they don't have nodules on their thyroid, these little bumps on their thyroid that'll develop into thyroid cancer. It's a very reasonable request, and it's quite upsetting that people like me and my family who are involuntarily exposed are not treated as well as people in the military who voluntarily signed up for some level of risk. Maybe not to be exposed to what they're exposed to, but they did voluntarily sign up. We were involuntarily exposed. Something's wrong with this picture.
What was your take on the, it was actually a couple months back, the Clinton administration had said it was looking at compensating the nuclear workers.
The Paducah folks?
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was talking with some staffers from a congressman's office recently about that. And I was asked that very same question. And my response, which I think was a good one, was that if you concentrate on one site where workers or off-site populations were exposed, the first step is to treat the workers and the off-site populations equally. You can't say, you poor workers, you were exposed, we're going to help you. But you off-site population, forget it, you're on your own. You have to treat exposed populations equally based on the estimated dose these folks received of the substance in question. There are certain diseases that are probably plausibly linked to the exposures, and you can figure out what level of exposure people had. So first of all, treat the off-site and worker populations equally. Secondly, and this was the second part of my response to the staffer that called me, you can't treat one site differently than other sites. In this country, you've got all kinds of parts and components of the Manhattan Project that produced the bomb. You've got the Savannah River, the Paducah site, the Oak Ridge site, you've got Hanford, the Idaho National Engineering Lab, Los Alamos, et cetera, et cetera. You've got exposed worker populations potentially at all those sites, and potentially off-site exposed people. You've also got Nevada test site exposed folks who lived all across the country. And you can figure out which ones of those folks who are exposed were at highest risk. You got to look at it all as one picture and treat them equally. You can't say, okay, Paducah folks, we're going to take care of you. What about the Oak Ridge people? And what about Hanford? You know, we may be a little ahead at Hanford on calculating doses through the Hanford Environmental Dose Reconstruction Project and some of the amendments to that. But, you know, that can happen at the other sites too. You just can't start treating one site fairly and ignoring the others. So it's an excellent first step. But that was my response when asked that question. And so you can take Paducah as your first part of the picture, but then you have to treat those on-site and off-site populations there fairly, and then you have to have that be the precedent-setting site and go to the other sites and treat them the same. Because you've heard lots of stories out of Oak Ridge and Hanford on people who are sick and injured. I haven't heard any response like they're giving to Paducah for those folks. So